Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parshas Emor, begins on page 673 in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash, and begins, Hashem said to Moshe, say to the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron, and tell them, each of you shall not contaminate himself to a dead person amongst his people, except for the relative who is closest to him, to his mother, to his father, to his son, to his daughter, and to his brother, and to his virgin sister who is close to him, who has not been wed to a man. To her shall he contaminate himself, and a husband among his people shall not contaminate himself to one who desecrates him. So the first mission in the Parsha is the first mitzvah in the Parsha is a mitzvah for Kohanim, and that's most of the beginning of the Parsha are about special mitzvahs for Kohanim, and this is that a Kohen is not allowed to become ritually impure through contact with the dead, except for certain exceptions, and that's the reason why you won't in general see a Kohen in the graveyard as part of the Chaver Kedisha or assisting with a burial, because Kohanim are restricted from going to the cemetery except when when it's the funeral of a close relative that's listed here. The first one, the relative who is closest to him, that's his wife in verse 2, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brother, and a sister who is unmarried. And our sages say that all of these are because it's the role of the relative to ensure that their relative who died has a dignified burial. So for all these relatives, he's commanded to take care of that. But if it's a wife who's married to someone else, so in that case she has a husband to take care of his burial. So they are precluded. So Kohen is precluded from participating in that funeral. And I remember being actually at a funeral for the wife of a Kohen. This was Phil Weinberg's daughter, who was married to Kohen, and he said that this is he was very uncomfortable. I mean, besides it being the funeral for his wife, said he's a Kohen, and Kohanim don't belong in the cemetery. That's not the place for a Kohen, and for him to be there, he said was very out of place. So the commentaries say, I think this is a Hirsch, says that in general for a clergyman, a cemetery is really the place that they shine the most. That when do people need rabbis? When do people need clergymen? One of their biggest roles is in death, because when someone dies, that's when people are thinking about the afterlife, and they're thinking about religion, and that's when the clergyman could catch you. That they're the ones who take care of usually marriage, divorce, and death, and especially death. Especially the cemetery is really where the clergyman shines. I can tell you, Rabbi Slatus, he is a master of the funeral, and but a Kohen who's traditionally that's the ultimate clergyman. For the Jews, they're not allowed in the cemetery, and that's to teach us that Judaism. Our souls continue after we die, but our religion is about how we live. It's a religion of life. It's not a religion of death, and for that reason, the Kohen's place is taking care of the spiritual lives of their fellow Jews. And others could take care of the bodies, but the ultimate job of a Jewish clergyman is to ensure that we're living our life, and death once again could be covered by others. And I saw the Moshe Sternbach and others say is that the whole idea of the ritual impurity in general, especially when it comes to death, is that there's a vacuum of life. Is that this was a person who was full of life, and a living person has the potential to do mitzvahs, and especially a Jew is a holy person. They have a neshama, they have a soul, a heavenly aspect to them, and when they pass away, the soul continues to live, but it's separated from the body. And the body is, like Rabbi Slater says, the frail house of clay that is being returned to the dust. It's missing that life. It's missing that neshama. It's missing that soul. and that's the source of the impurity. And in a similar way, there's impurity when a woman gives birth, where again they had this living soul that was within them that's now outside. There's a vacuum. There's a lack of life there. The life has left them and gone off on its own, but the life has left them, and that's a source of impurity. And nida as well. That's potential life that's lost. And that's the source of this ritual impurity. Okay. So, and this little paragraph concludes in verse 4, a husband among his people shall not contaminate himself to one who desecrates him. So it says a husband among his people, and our sages say that, that includes, it says a husband among his people, that actually excludes another exception to the rule that a Kohen can't become ritually impure through contact with the dead. And that is that a mace mitzvah, someone who's not among his people, if there's someone dies and there's no one to bury them, let's say a Kohen is traveling and he finds a dead person at the side of the road. So he has a mitzvah to bury that person, even though it's not his relative. And even a Kohen Gadol, who we'll see later in the Parsha, is not allowed to even become ritually impure through contact with his father and mother who passed away. He's not allowed to attend their funeral, a Kohen Gadol specifically. But if a Kohen Gadol has a mace mitzvah, somebody who has nobody to bury them, so even a Kohen Gadol would have a mitzvah specifically to bury that person. Okay, in verse 5, on page 673, they shall not make a bald spot on their heads, and they shall not shave an edge of their beard, and their flesh they shall not cut a gash. This is true about a Kohen, and our sages say it's true about any Jew as well. They shall be holy to their God. They shall not desecrate the name of their God, for the fire offerings of Hashem, the food of their God they offer, so they must remain holy. So a few things about this, specifically about a Kohen. That it says they shall not make a bald spot on their heads, they shall not shave the edge of their beard, and their flesh they shall not make a gash. And the commentaries say that this was the custom of the pagan priests, is that they would make bodily modifications to mark themselves as priests. Among the pagan medicine men, you'd find they'd have tattoos and piercings and gashes and scars all over to mark them as this is a holy person. And amongst the I think this is also from Moshe Sternbach and Tam Vadas. He comments that, and even amongst like the priests and the priests have their vestments, and the monks, like they'd shave their heads in a very specific way, where they'd shave the top and have like the fringe unshaven, which is really what this is referring to, that making the bald spot on their heads. And Moshe Sternbach explains that that's because with these pagan priests, there's really nothing different about them than the laity, I think the word is, than the lay members. And so in order to mark themselves as different, as special, they need to make these bodily modifications. But with the leaders of the Jewish people, we really don't have much of, outside the Kohanim, but we really don't have much of a hierarchy. So the Kohanim have their vestments that they wear when they do the service, but otherwise they have nothing to mark them as being special. That we know this person's a Kohen and this person's not a Kohen. And the reason is because the difference is within. They don't need a marking, they don't need a bodily modification to show that this is a holy person. They're a holy person because they're a holy person on the inside. And that shines forth for all to see. And really, nowadays, we don't have any kind of hierarchy in our, in observant Judaism. We don't have like the head rabbi and the next rabbi and, and his underlings and his underlings. We don't have that. There are some like groups of rabbis who've come together in organizations, but those are organizations of just like, for common goals that have groups to lead, but that doesn't say anything about their status in Judaism. And until recently, the person that most people recognize as the Gadol Hadar, the greatest authority, really, holiest man, I would say, was Reb Chaim Kanievsky, who didn't have any kind of job. He wasn't the head of any yeshiva. He wasn't the rabbi of a synagogue. He was recognized as this is a holy man. He doesn't need any appointments. The holiness comes from once, like I said, the holiness doesn't come from anyone appointing him or being hired to lead this organization. It comes from the Jewish people recognizing this is a holy man. This is a great Torah scholar. This person is righteous. Okay, and another thing the commentaries comment on this, in verse 6, it says, they should be holy to their God, and they shall not desecrate the name of their God. So Rabbi Sternbach adds that you would think that the order should be the opposite, that the first priority, the first step is don't desecrate God, and additionally, be holy to God. They shall be holy to their God. Why is it in this order, they shall be holy to God, and they shall not desecrate their God, as if becoming holy is the first step and not desecrating is the second step? So to that he answers that the holier a person is, the more careful they have to be about their actions, because the higher spiritual level a person's at, the more effect their actions have in the spiritual world, and the more people look up to them. And when they make mistakes, when they stumble, it makes a big chilul Hashem, a desecration of Hashem's name. For example, people who are in our shul, let's say people who pray in Bibi Jacob, so we're viewed as the, super Orthodox in Savannah. So if we would do something inappropriate, someone would see us do something that we shouldn't be doing or treating others badly. So that doesn't just reflect on ourselves, but it reflects on those super Orthodox people. And let's say if we would, God forbid, let's say, be cruel to another person. So people would reflect on those Bibi Jacob people are, they don't know how to act. And the higher our spiritual level is, if a great rabbi did that, so even the more so, that would be even worse. So it's saying because we're there, the Kohanim have to be so holy. Because they're so holy, therefore they have to be extra careful, extra prudent in not, where am I? Not desecrating the name of Hashem, their God. Okay, so now in verse 7, they have special rules of who they're allowed to marry. They may not, they shall not marry a woman who is a harlot or who has been desecrated. A woman who is a harlot is a woman who has had relations with a person that's prohibited by Torah law. Let's say an incestual relationship, or let's say with a mamzer, it's a hard one to translate, but in general, it's, let's say if she had if let's say she was married and she had a relationship with another man, so things of this nature, an adulterous relationship, incestual relationship that's prohibited by the Torah, that is what makes a woman a harlot, according to Torah law. What's that? No. So if she was not married and had relations with other men who aren't her relatives, so that would actually not qualify her as halachically a harlot who's prohibited to Kohen. Well, whatever her intentions are, the harlot that's mentioned here that's prohibited for a Kohen to marry is one who had a relation that's prohibited by really to any Jew to have. So, okay. Yeah. Yes, but that's what this is, just to be precise about what the Torah means here, as understood by our sages. Yes. Yes. So a woman who is a harlot who has been desecrated, that's a woman who had a relation that's prohibited to Kohen. Let's say if she was whatever. And they shall not marry a woman who has been divorced by her husband. A Kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee, and even his own divorcee. So if, like, usually a Jew, someone gets divorced, they're allowed to remarry their ex-wife. Not only are they allowed to remarry, it might even be a special mitzvah to remarry if they can, if it's the right decision. But unless she married someone else in between. But a Kohen, once they're divorced, there's no going back. And for this reason, the divorce procedure is actually different for a Kohen than anyone else. They make it harder. They make it more drawn out in order because they have to be really short. Okay, for each one, it's holy to his God. In verse 80, you shall sanctify him, for he offers the food of your God. He shall remain holy to you, for holy am I, Hashem, who sanctifies you. That we have a mitzvah to sanctify him, to honor him. We give him the first aliyah. If there's benching, if we have someone leading the benching, many times we'd offer it to Kohen. We'd give precedence to Kohen in order to honor the Kohen. Yes?
Stick together.
Okay, you got it. Okay, if the daughter of a Kohen will be desecrated through adultery, that means she's a Nara Marasa, when the daughter of a Kohen commits adultery, she desecrates her father, she shall be consumed by the fire. She actually gets a different capital punishment, a more severe capital punishment than a regular adulterer would get. Okay. Now the Kohen Gadol has additional stringencies in verse 10 on page 675. The Kohen is exalted above his brethren, upon whose head the anointment oil has been poured, who has been inaugurated to don the vestments. The Kohen Gadol, the head Kohen, shall not leave his head unshorn, shall not rend his garments again. He shall not come near any. That means even if he loses a close relative, he can't tear his clothes in mourning. He can't let his hair grow long, as we do. We don't shave or cut our hair when in mourning. He shall not come near any dead person. He shall not contaminate himself to his father or his mother. So even if his father or mother died, the Kohen Gadol would not be allowed to participate in the funeral. He shall not leave the sanctuary. He shall not desecrate the sanctuary of Hashem. For a crown, the oil of his God's anointment is upon him. I am Hashem. He shall marry a woman in her virginity, a widow, a divorcee, a desecrated woman, a harlot. He shall not marry these. Only a virgin of his people shall he take as a wife. So whereas a regular Kohen cannot marry a divorcee, he is allowed to marry a widow, though. A Kohen Gadol, though, is not even allowed to marry a widow. Thus he shall not desecrate his offspring among his people, for I am Hashem who sanctifies him. Okay, then it has the disqualifying blemishes. If there are certain physical imperfections in a Kohen, he's not allowed to do the service in the Beis HaMikdash. That doesn't mean he's not a Kohen. He's even allowed to eat of the offerings that only a Kohen is allowed to eat, but he can't perform the service. And our sages say that it's not that there's anything wrong with him, but the same way if you were bringing you're bringing a gift to the king, the messenger you'd send would be somebody, that you'd be dressed in a nice suit and the proper, in respectable. So if we use someone with physical imperfections to be doing the service, it implies we don't attach importance to it. But of course, the person is loved by Hashem as much as any other person. There's nothing wrong with their character because they're lame or whatever their physical imperfection happens to be. Okay. And now on page 677, chapter 22, safeguarding the sanctity of the offerings in the Truma. In verse 1, Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons, they shall withdraw from the holies of the children of Israel, that which is sanctified to me, so as not to desecrate my holy name, I am Hashem. Basically, if any Kohen is ritually impure, they're not allowed to eat of any of the sacred meat, and they're not allowed to even eat the Truma, those gifts that are special gifts given to the Kohen from the crops and from what's grown. And on page 679, verse 10, no layman shall eat of the holy, so only a Kohen is allowed to eat the truma. One who resides with a Kohen or his laborer shall not eat of the holy. This means even a Jewish bondsman, whether he's sold for 6 years and the 7th year he'll go free, or he got his ear pierced because he decided he wanted to stay past the 6th year and he'd go free in the Yovel in the Jubilee year, even such a Jewish bondsman cannot eat of the holy truma, these gifts for the Kohen. But if a Kohen shall acquire a person an acquisition of his money, this is if you were to acquire a non-Jewish slave, he may eat of it. A non-Jewish slave of a Kohen is allowed to eat of the truma. And so when born in his home, they may eat of his food. His children, even his daughters, can eat of his food. If a Kohen's daughter shall be married to a layman, his wife. So let's say a Kohen marries a Yisrael, marries a non-Kohen woman. So his wife, until the marriage, is not allowed to eat the truma, not allowed to eat these gifts for the Kohen. Once they're married, though, she's part of the family. She's at that point allowed to eat of the truma. His daughters are allowed to eat, but if the daughter marries a non-Kohen, then she's not allowed to eat of the holy. If let's say, if that marriage ends, so as it says in verse 13, and if a Kohen's daughter who will become a widow or a divorcee and not have offspring, she may return to her father's home as in her youth. She may eat from her father's food, but no layman may eat of it. But if she did have children from her marriage with a non-Kohen, so at that point, that kind of sets her marriage in stone, that she's removed from her father's house. And at that point, she's not allowed to eat truma, these gifts to the Kohen, even if her marriage were to end. In verse 14, if a man will eat of the holy inadvertently, let's say a non-Kohen designates some of what grows as truma as the gift for the Kohen, and then he forgets or whatever it is, and he eats it. He didn't know it was truma, and he eats from it. So he shall add its fifth to it. He has to pay back a Kohen the principal value of that plus 1/5 surcharge, and repay the holy to the Kohen, etc. Okay. Verse 17 on page 679, we have the mitzvah that just as the Kohen who's bringing the offering cannot have certain physical imperfections, so the animal that we're bringing should be an animal in good condition and can't have physical imperfections. Once again, it's considered disrespectful. We're showing disrespect by bringing animals that have these imperfections as an offering. Okay. So one comment I want to make here, this is in verse 18. It says, speak to Aaron and to his sons and to all the children of Israel and say to them, any man of the house of Israel and of the proselyte among Israel who will bring his offering for any of the vows of their free will offerings that they will bring to Hashem for an elevation offering, to be favorable for you, must be unblemished male, the cattle, the fox, the goats, etc. So the Hebrew here, it says, the English, they translated any man of the house of Israel. The Hebrew is ish mi beis Israel. Any man is literally a man of the house of Israel. It says man twice. So the Gemara, the Talmud and Menachos infers from here the man is to say not only if he's from the house of Israel, even a non-Jew, if he brings one of these donation voluntary offerings, it's accepted. But the Gemara qualifies this, Rabbi Kiva and the Gemara qualifies this and says only if, as the verse ends, that it's for Hashem an elevation offering. That a non-Jew could only bring an elevation offering to Hashem, not a, let's say, a shlamim, not a peace offering. So what's the reason for this? And this is kind of a theme in this week's Parsha, is that the reason is that we have the Torah given to us. And in the Torah, we have lots of mitzvahs, lots of positive commandments to fulfill, lots of prohibitions that we're not allowed to do certain things. And what that does is that pretty much throughout our lives, every aspect of our lives is regulated to an extent. That we could fulfill mitzvahs, and we could mitzvahs either by doing it right or by not doing, or by doing it in a right way without violating a prohibition. For example, we have mitzvahs, that lots of people like eating and like drinking. And that's something, sometimes we have a mitzvah to eat and drink. We have a mitzvah to eat on Shabbos. We have a mitzvah to eat Erev Yom Kippur. We have a mitzvah to eat on holidays. And when we eat, we make a blessing on it. And there are things that we're prohibited to eat. We can't eat on Yom Kippur. We can't eat certain foods. They're prohibited to us. So through this, our eating itself becomes a service of Hashem. And this is something that I missed earlier, but there's a mitzvah specifically for the Kohen Gadol to be married. That when it says that the Kohen Gadol has to marry certain people, it's saying he has to marry them, meaning the Kohen Gadol has to be married, which is the opposite of some other religions where the priests specifically have to be celibate. That's the rules. Our mitzvah is that the Kohen Gadol has to be married, and that's a mitzvah. And that's so whereas marriage could be viewed by some as a dirty institution. It's an institution where people are having relations, which that's something that's not for a priest, the physical pleasure. For us, once again, it's regulated, where we have actually a mitzvah to take care of the physical needs of our spouses, and there are some people that we're prohibited from having relations with, and as we said, when we fulfill the mitzvahs as regulated by the Torah, that we're doing a mitzvah, we're fulfilling mitzvahs from Hashem, and through this, all our physical lives are sanctified and elevated. Whereas for someone who's not Jewish, who doesn't have these mitzvahs, when they serve, they don't serve Hashem by their living their physical lives. They serve Hashem by serving God. So they could bring an elevation offering, and that's their service of Hashem. Bringing an elevation offering that's completely burnt, doing something completely for God. When they pray, praying to Hashem is their service of Hashem, but eating isn't service of Hashem. It is for us when we do it with the mitzvahs, but someone who doesn't have the mitzvahs, that's not service of Hashem. Okay. So once again, it discusses that the animals that are brought as offerings, or whatever is brought as offerings, can't have imperfections. And in verse 26, it states, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, this is verse 26 on page 681. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, when an ox or a sheep or a goat is born, it shall remain under its mother for 7 days, and from the 8th day on, it is acceptable for a fire offering to Hashem. And the commentaries observe that this is very similar to the mitzvah of bris milah, that a circumcision also, 7 days the baby is left uncircumcised, the 8th day it can be circumcised. Here it's saying that from that 7 days the animal you have to leave it alone, and you could only bring an animal as an offering from the point that it's 8 days old. And I saw, I don't remember where, that this is connected to the Shabbos. I think this is the Zohar actually said that just like an animal, one of the reasons our sages say that the bris milah is on the 8th day is because before we have a bris milah, which is subjugating the physical nature to Hashem, it has to experience a Shabbos, which is testimony that Hashem created the world. So when we bringing an animal as an offering also, we want the animal to experience the Shabbos, which once again testifies that Hashem is the creator of the world. Hashem created the world in 6 days, rested on the 7th. Then we could bring it as an offering to Hashem. Once we recognize that Hashem is the creator, we could bring the animal as an offering to Hashem. Okay, so now continuing on, there's a prohibition in verse 28, but an ox or a sheep or a goat, you may not slaughter it and its offspring on the same day. So if, let's say, we have a mother cow and a baby cow, we're not allowed to, or mother goat, baby goat, we can't slaughter them both on the same day. Yes, and that's a prohibition. And the Gemara actually the Talmud discusses different times that sellers, like a farmer who's selling animals at certain times has to be very careful about who he sells it to or what he's selling to make sure. So let's say before Sukkot, where everybody's getting meat together for the holiday. So he has to be careful not to sell a mother and its young, because it's likely that whoever's buying is gonna slaughter it for Yontif, and it'll be slaughtered on the same day. Get ready for Yontif. Okay, there's different limits about when we're allowed to eat the meat of the offering, the peace offerings, etc. Okay, so now on page 683. Oh, sorry, I skipped a big one. In verse 31, page 681, the bottom, verse 31, you shall observe my commandments, perform them, I am Hashem. You shall not desecrate my holy name, rather I should be sanctified among the children of Israel. I am Hashem who sanctifies you. And so this is the prohibition against Chilul Hashem, against desecrating the name of Hashem, and the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, of sanctifying the name of Hashem. That we have a mitzvah even to the point of our lives, to give up our lives for the sanctification of Hashem, for the mitzvahs. Okay, so now and next the next big part of the parsha are the festivals. Okay, so page 683, verse 23. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Hashem's appointed festivals that you are to designate as holy convocations. These are my appointed festivals." And then it continues with Shabbos, Pesach, the Omer, Shavuos, etc. But first of all, the commentaries say, just this introduction, Hashem's appointed festivals that you are to designate as holy convocations. These are my appointed festivals. What does that mean? You are to designate as holy convocations. These are my appointed festivals. So I think it's the Sforno who says that, and the Kli Yakar also says similar, that that if we designate them as holy convocations, what does that mean? We come together and we maybe learn Torah about the festivals. We say Torah thoughts and we eat together in celebration of the holiday and we sing songs praising Hashem. We say Hallel together. So then that means that we come together in a holy convocation. Then these are my festivals. Those are festivals of Hashem, if we observe them in holiness. But if we don't observe them in holiness and we just use them as an excuse to eat and drink and be merry, so then they're not Hashem's festivals in a sense. Okay, then it gives Shabbos once again in verse 3. For 6 days labor may be done, and the seventh day is a day of complete rest, a holy convocation. You shall not do any work. It is a Shabbos for Hashem in all your dwelling places. That's Shabbos, first one. Next is Pesach in verse 4. You have the mitzvah on the first month, on the 14th day of the month. The afternoon is the time of a Pesach offering to Hashem, and that we bring the Pesach offering on the 14th day. And on the 15th day of this month is the festival of Matzah to Hashem. You shall eat a matzahs for a 7-day period. On the first day, there shall be a holy convocation for you. You shall do no laborious work. You shall bring a fire offering to Hashem for a 7-day period. On the 7th day shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no laborious work again. So the first day and the 7th day is Yantiv. We keep 2 days for the first day and 2 days for the second day because we're in exile. But in Israel, in fact, they only keep 1 day, the first day and the 7th day, and the rest is Chol Hamoed. Okay, that's a great idea. Next is the Omer, which we're in the middle of verse 9 on the bottom of page 683. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land that I give you and you reap its harvest, you shall bring an Omer from your first harvest to the Kohen. He shall wave the Omer before Hashem to gain favor for you. On the morrow of the rest day, the Kohen shall wave it. This is a mitzvah to bring a special meal offering on the second day of Pesach. On the day you wave the Omer, you shall perform the service of an unblemished lamb, etc. And then in verse 14, on page 685, you shall not eat bread or roasted kernels or plump kernels until this very day, until you bring the offering of your God. It is an eternal decree for your generations in all your dwelling places. They were not allowed to eat the grain of the new year until after the Omer offering is brought. So this is called the mitzvah of Chadash. It's the prohibition against eating new grain before the Omer would be brought. And that's the second day of Pesach. The Poskim, the halachic authorities, struggle to explain why we're not particular about this these days. And they really struggle to explain, but ultimately they have various answers as to why, if we don't know that something is Chadash, that it's from the new harvest, there are various answers as to why we're allowed to eat it. And that these are answers we could rely on, but there are many people who are particular in this, and especially amongst the Sephardic Jews, that they won't eat, that they'll be very particular not to eat any of the new grain until the Omer is brought, and they'll actually have like whole books coming out with every year with like product codes of like what products you could have until what point. Okay. Then in verse 15, you shall count for yourself from the morrow of the rest day. That means from the second day of Pesach, from the day when you bring the Omer of the waving, 7 weeks they shall be complete. 7 complete weeks until the morrow of the 7th week. You shall count 50 days. This is the Sfiras Omer. Last night we counted 28. We'll get there. And it shall offer a new meal offering to Hashem from your dwelling place. You shall bring bread that shall be waved, 2 loaves of 2/10 ephah. This is on Shavuos. There was a special offering of 2 loaves called the Shnei Alechem, the 2 loaves. It shall be fine flour, etc. And these were the first. These were the first of the new grain that was brought as an offering in the tabernacle and the temple. And then in verse 21, you shall convoke on this very day, on the day of Shavuos, there shall be a holy convocation for yourself. You should do no laborious work. It is an eternal decree in your dwelling places for your generations. And once again, in Israel, in fact, they have that one day of Shavuos, that one day after we count, after the 7 weeks of counting the Omer. Outside the land of Israel, we keep an extra day as well. Then on page 687, that might be my notice to count the Omer. But then on page, what? Yep. And then in verse 22 on page 687, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not remove completely the corners of your field as you reap. You shall not gather the gleanings of your harvest, for the poor and the proselyte shall you leave them. I'm Hashem your God. And then it moves on to Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara asks that, what's this doing here? We have, we're in the middle of the festivals. We started with Shabbos, which is its own question. Then we have Pesach, the Omer, Shavuos. Why are we sticking in the these mitzvahs of giving certain gleanings to the poor, right, in between Shavuos and Rosh Hashanah? So it was the time of the harvest then, and in the times of the time of the harvest, that may be how we celebrate the harvest. But the Gemara says that this is to teach us that anyone who gives the proper gifts from the poor, it's as if they built the altar and brought these offerings on the altar. And Reb Shimon Schwab maybe elaborates on this, is that this is actually hinting at a holiday that's missing from the list of holidays. And that's Tisha B'Av, which is between Shavuos and Rosh Hashanah, which is where this is put. Between Shavuos and Rosh Hashanah comes Tisha B'Av, and according to our sages, that's when the Mashiach will come and the new Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt. And this is a reference, a hint to that holiday of Tisha B'Av, which will be a holiday celebrating the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, of the temple, which will come about by us giving the proper gifts to the poor. Okay, then comes Rosh Hashanah, and that's in verse 23. Then in verse 26, we have the 10th day of the 7th month, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, mitzvah of fasting and not doing laborious work again on Yom Kippur. Then on verse 33, we have the mitzvah of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres, and the 8th day of Sukkot. And okay, and on page 691, it concludes that in verse 44, after it has Sukkot, sitting in boots, verse 44 on page 691, and Moshe declared the appointed festivals of Hashem to the children of Israel, which seems to wrap up the section of the festivals. Then chapter 24 on page 691, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, command the children of Israel that they take to you clear olive oil pressed for illuminating to kindle a continuous lamp. Now, what's this doing here? So we already had the mitzvah of the menorah, of getting olive oil and lighting the menorah in Parshas Tetzaveh, which was a while ago. So why are we repeating it here? So Rashi says, I believe that there it was really telling you about the building of the menorah, which, just as an aside, I think it was the Beis Yitzchak, understands that it's the building of the menorah includes the lighting, that until you had the glasses, until you had the lamps kindled, the menorah wasn't fully built. And that's why that's part of the building process. Whatever it is, but the Rashi says here it's giving you the service of how it was lit. But it doesn't really answer what it's doing here. The Ramban says that at this point in time, they ran out of the original olive oil that was donated by the Nesiim, by the heads of the tribes. So now they were told to solicit olive oil from the community. It came from communal funds. But I saw and I wanted to see this, and I saw in the Balaturim that he says that this is a reference to Hanukkah. That once again, we were listing the holidays and discussing all the holidays, and we ended up with Sukkot. So the Balaturim says that immediately after we discuss Sukkot, we talk about it talks about the menorah, and that's a reference to the mitzvah Hanukkah, which would be enacted by later generations and during the Second Temple, which, once again, is the holiday that comes after Sukkot, is Hanukkah. So this is a reference to Hanukkah, and he says that it's to teach us that just like we say Hallel during the 8 days of Sukkot, So too, we say Hallel during the 8 days of Hanukkah. I thought that was nice. And afterwards, we have the mitzvah of the showbread that was arranged on the table of showbread, which was in the in the sanctuary of the temple, of the tabernacle and the temple. And then the parsha concludes with the blasphemer on page 693. It states in verse 693, verse 10, the son of an Israelite woman went out, and he was the son of an Egyptian man among the children of Israel. They fought in the camp, the son of the Israelite woman and an Israelite man. The son of the Israelite woman pronounced the name and blasphemed. So they brought him to Moshe. The name of his mother was Shlomis, daughter of Divri of the tribe of Dan. They placed him under guard to clarify themselves through Hashem. So what's this whole story here? So Rashi brings from our sages say, is that it says that his mother was from the tribe of Dan. So he set up and he wanted a portion in the encampment of the tribe of Dan. But the tribe of Dan said that he can't be part of their encampment because because the tribe, even though being a Jew follows the mother, the tribe follows the father. And he was the son of an Egyptian. So for that reason, he wasn't of the tribe of Dan. So he would have a part of the Israelite camp, but not in in a specific tribe, like the tribe of Dan. So he came before Moshe. He came before the court to be judged, and the court ruled against him. And that's when he was furious that he lost this court case, and he blasphemed the name of Hashem. And Hashem. So it says they placed him under guard to clarify themselves through Hashem. And just as an aside, in our social justice for today, the commentary, the Medrash says that it says they placed him under guard. The commentary says they placed him alone under guard, even though there was another person. This was the gatherer of wood, who was also incarcerated at the time when they were seeing what to do with him, but they did not put them together. Because because the blasphemer, the one who gathered wood, which is mentioned elsewhere, so him, they knew that he was subject to death, a death penalty, capital punishment. They just didn't know which one. Whereas this person, they didn't know what to do with him. Therefore, they felt they couldn't put him together. And the Talmud just says that this is to show that even somebody who's subject to capital punishment, but we're not going to put two people together who are on different levels of transgression, because that could be a difficult company. That the people say that the worst part of prison might be the guards, but it's the inmates. That people who are put in prison are surrounded by criminals. That's right. Exactly, and that's something that the Torah is telling us, is that in our justice system, we follow the Torah, and there might be people there there's corporal punishment, there's capital punishment, but only to the point that's prescribed by the Torah, and we don't inflict any additional punishment on them other than what's prescribed. So it continues in verse 17. It says that he'll be put to death, but in verse 17, and a man, if he strikes mortally any human life, he shall be put to death. And a man who strikes mortally an animal life shall make restitution, a life for a life. And if a man inflicts a wound in his fellow, so shall be done to him, etc. In verse 21, one who strikes an animal shall make restitution. One who strikes a person shall be put to death. If he kills a person, if he kills an animal, he has to pay the owner for the animal. But if he kills a person, he's put to death. In 695, there shall be one law for you. It shall be for proselyte and native alike, for I, Hashem, am your God. Verse 23, Moshe spoke to the children of Israel. They took the blasphemer to the outside of the camp. They stoned him to death. And the children of Israel did as Hashem had commanded Moshe. So, yes. So why is it that, why is there this interruption about if he strikes his fellow human, he's put to death for murder and he has to pay for damages? What's that doing here? Again, it's in between Hashem telling him this man has to be put to death for blaspheming, for cursing the name of Hashem, and then they couldn't put him to death. In between, it starts talking about murder and damages. And I think as Moshe Feinstein says, that this is to teach us that this is the first time capital punishment has been carried out. Not in history, but according to the laws of the Torah. It's the first time that capital punishment has been carried out by the laws of the Torah. And for that reason, before it was done, we had to fortify what the value of a life is, that it's not something to be taken lightly, that if we're putting a person to death, it's not because life is cheap, it's because the transgression is severe. And to do that, we have to start with, if a person murders another person, that person is put to death. And even a person's property is taken, that one has to make restitution if they damage another person's property, to show how much an individual, how much valued an individual is, and only then can we carry out a capital punishment. Okay, shkayach, everybody have a great Shabbos.